So we were very lucky today to have as our guest Rory McKeand, who is the CEO of Technology Services Group.
That business has grown to 40 million turnover, 7 million EBITDA and 300 headcount.
They've recently been through a private equity transaction where they've raised a significant investment in the business.
Yeah, really interesting conversation with Rory. One of the things that came across really strongly was how the business had got into that transaction very much on even terms with the investor. They'd had a number of aspects that they'd wanted to put in place in EBT, supports their foundation post-investment, and really interesting to hear from him about how they ensured that outcome for the business.
And for anybody who is thinking of going through a fundraising transaction, I'm sure they will take a lot from that. The conversation in general, which is absolutely packed full of content. So Rory comes across as somebody who is very deliberate about everything he does, his leadership style, their operating systems in the business. So on every subject we covered, whether it was recruitment, performance management, very specific, very clinical about what they do, but with an enormous amount of passion as well.
Yeah, and real warmth to it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we enormously enjoyed the conversation. There's so much to take away. A lot of what he covers is completely transferable to lots of businesses, including our own. You will see me and Simon leaning forward for a little bit and scribbling notes very often because there's a lot to take away. It's a really successful, organic and acquisitive growth plan that they're on. And yet we hope you take from it as much as we did. So hello and welcome to the High Growth Leadership Podcast. We're delighted to be joined here today by Rory McKeand from Technology Services Group. So hi, Rory.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you for having me.
Hi, Rory.
We're delighted to have Rory here today. Rory is the CEO of TSG, as we've said, very high growth managed service provider. And you are hot off a very successful private equity transaction. So we're delighted that you found the time to speak to us today. Thank you for doing so. You can do a much better job than Simon or I of describing what it is that Technology Services Group do. So do you mind if we start there? You just explain a little bit about the business?
Yeah, brilliant. So we're a managed services provider that focuses mainly on cyber and cloud, and we do that for about 1,000 clients across the UK. And we're also in the top 1% as a Microsoft partner, looking at all different types of business applications.
Okay. And when you say top 1% as a Microsoft partner, is that top 1% by volume of customer support? Is it top 1% in terms of quality? What does that mean?
Great question. So it's from a Microsoft sort of measure partners on multiple fronts. So it's about how well you're doing commercially, but also around your certifications. And so we've got about 1,200 certs across over 200 engineers. So it gives you an idea of the sort of the depth of talent we've got. And then we've got these audits we have to do that then gives you various specializations and accreditations. And so we're in quite an elite group. And from that perspective, and then from a quality bit, I'm going to jump in if that's okay.
No,
but
okay.
We've got the in our particular industry in the channel, we've got the highest NPS score in the UK, which is pretty cool. So last year we're up at over plus 86, which is pretty high to get when you do it across projects. We do it actually even across sales as well, and support and everything in between.
Phenomenally high when you consider the relationship that most people have with IT. It's not everybody's favourite subject, and we see that as two people who run a recruitment business, which join the club. So to have an NPS at that high, that's really remarkable. What would you put that down to?
Just an obsession with customer experience. So one of the things I want us to be known for is not just the expertise of our people, but how we treat our clients. And we do a lot of behavioural mapping, and we grow a lot of our own talent. So we're happy to get into some of that a bit later, but yeah, we do things a little bit differently.
Okay. Just jumping into that now, when you say we do a lot of behavioural mapping, what do you mean by that?
So we deliberately look for people who are not just experts in what they do. So I mean, I've been in IT now for almost 20 years, and I remember when I started, there were a lot of broom cupboard type people who were amazing technically, but that you wouldn't want to put in front of a client. We don't have that luxury anymore, and so actually we now recruit mainly for will and the ability to learn, and then we put through all of our new starters and people who join us even in mid parts of their career through a lot of advanced training. And so what we look for in terms of behavioural profile is those that like to work with others, those that are quite sort of social, wanting interactions with clients, who have the willingness to learn the technical skills. And we've got a great academy that can kind of teach that, and we've got some brilliant seniors. You can never get away from the plumber and plumber's mate view of learning tech. And so we've got a lot of really good mentoring schemes as well.
Okay. There's so much to get into there. It sounds like it's going to be really, really fun conversation. Just before we do you mind just giving people a kind of picture of where TSG is today, the transaction you've been through, the scale of the business, how many people you have?
Yeah, sure. So we're sort of just under 300 people as a business. Main offices are in Glasgow, Newcastle, and London. Although we now have added Bristol and Aylesbury through acquisition, and we look after about 1,500 clients. As I mentioned before, about 1,000 of those are sort of managed services. About 500 of those are sort of applications only. We have a number of clients, about half of them actually, that take us for the full spread. So use us as their lead tech partner for both cyber, their business applications, and their sort of cloud platform as well.
Okay.
Cool. And just on the customer base, are there any particular verticals that you have significant expertise with?
Yeah, so we've got growing verticals in sort of housing. We also got quite a few sort of food and beverage businesses, and we have quite a few sort of professional services firms that we work with as well. But actually, we've got lots of little pockets, and we tend to do that through, we have a customer success approach. So we've got one customer success manager who focuses mainly on construction, another on, another who focuses on accountancy firms and others. So we've got about 12 broad sectors where we've got good referenceability. But in terms of IP and real go-to-market, it's probably about 3 or 4, and we're looking to grow those over the next few years.
Okay. And then thinking about your journey with the business, sort of 8-9 years or so since you joined, did it have similar attributes? Did it have were there similar reasons for you joining the business then as there are for people coming into the organisation now?
Yeah, I think so. For me, it was about the people, and not in a twee sort of corny way. But I did a series of programs. So I was a project manager doing transformation programs before that was a buzzword, and so I came into TSG to do the same thing. Then fell in love with the place, mainly the people. It was just a really good core. And so it was just running that transformation program, then led to being chief operating officer, then chief exec. And it was just mainly genuinely about the people. And so by just keeping the real talent, some of the great bits of the culture, but just keep kind of refining back to that core and making it so that genuinely it makes a really pleasant, engaging place to be.
And prior to you joining, could you discern whether there'd been, I say, sort of a deliberate effort to craft a culture and a team in a way that became attractive to you when you joined and wanted to stay within the business?
I think it's really hard because TSG was made up of about 26 acquisitions before I joined. And so super aggressive. And I think there was definitely an idea of culture, but it just came too late. They sort of bought a bunch of things, and then you get to the position of what can I create with this? I'd come from a couple of businesses where I really enjoyed the culture. So there's a Northeast business called NCFE Group that really taught me everything about culture, particularly in the early years there. And that was a challenge for me. I wanted to bring that and say, can we create this in the IT industry, which is known for perhaps not doing the right thing by its customers by and large, being very sales driven. Not there's anything wrong with sales, but sales to the point of selling things that people don't need and not looking after your people, seeing them as an asset. And
made even harder by the fact that, as you say, it was a buy and build.
Yeah.
So there was, there wasn't one culture to change. There was lots of different cultures to try and change.
And I think that's really different when we've done 2 acquisitions now, and we've been so picky about the culture of the businesses that we're bringing in. We've got a really clear identity of what works for us.
Okay.
Whereas that sort of DNA, that picture wasn't there when I joined TSG.
Okay.
But again, you've got 26 different cultures that you're trying to bring together. So it takes a while, and you've got to make a lot of mistakes to create it.
Okay. Interesting. So you touched on this a little bit already, but it is a famously competitive market, being a managed service provider, and it sounds like, and as is trying to compete to acquire businesses in that space as well. There's lots of people trying to consolidate in that space. Sounds like you've done both very, very successfully, both organic growth and identifying targets. How do you think, and you've touched on some of this already, but worth repeating, how do you think TSG have managed to succeed and grow in such a competitive market?
Yeah, so I think it's a competitive market. Anyway, so I worked in the US market, and I can tell you it's twice as mature in the UK, in the UK than it is in the US.
Really?
If I took TSG or any of our competitors, and we all took one state each, we dominate. Genuinely, it's not even the UK market. If you look at user adoption of all Microsoft apps as an indicator, or the maturity of the certifications, or just the general
You always assume that it would be the other way around from a position of total ignorance, but that's
Well, if you look at the UK market, so without bamboozling with stats, about 90% of the market is made up of less than 8 million turnover businesses.
Okay.
That's a UK market. That's then exacerbated when you go to the US, where it's even smaller businesses. So again, more than 90% is made up of $4 million or less.
Okay.
So it's lots of what they call mum and pop shops.
Yeah.
And so that leads to sort of fragmented sort of views of what IT even is. But if you think about the disciplines, well, we've got, as I say, about 1,200 certs for only about 220 engineers.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine, if you're a 4 million turnover with maybe 20, 30 engineers if you're lucky. How do you make that work? Or over here, you have lots of small providers who are maybe 10, 12 engineers and 3 vans. Like how do you spread that across? And so you tend to find, although they really, they care about their clients and they mean the best, they don't have that maturity. And that's where we differentiate. We've got an enterprise capability, but we sort of deploy that to like a small to medium sized business market.
Okay, interesting.
Which is interesting because then we often attract people that are either ex-enterprise, but they have to have that small business mindset, wearing multiple hats, working with clients who perhaps don't have the budget they need for their enterprise expectations, and how you bridge the gap.
Yeah. And I imagine on top of that, the Microsoft angle that you mentioned earlier, I imagine that's a very fun flywheel to keep turning once it starts. I imagine that gathers momentum, and then once you're in that position, I don't know how you get there to start with. It would be useful to understand, but once you are, I suppose that's a nice kind of moat to put around yourselves. It's a hard thing for other people to replicate.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it used to be, being a Microsoft Gold partner as an example, you might need 2 or 3 people and maybe 10 to 50,000 pounds worth of spend. Now it's hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of spend, and you need dozens of people who are good enough to get multiple certs. And these are not, used to be multiple choice questions, used to be a bit of a joke that you could go through it multiple times and then you know all the answers. Whereas now it's all practicals and audits. So it's pretty intense. In fact, my team this week are going through the Azure expert audit. They've done 3 test audits just to make sure that we're ready. And it's probably going to take up the full week and probably about a dozen people to get through it. So it's pretty full on. So that's great. But if you're a startup, that's a real problem. So previously you could maybe be a few contractors with a bit of Microsoft experience, and then you might gain a few customers, bit of referenceability, get a few people, maybe a couple of apprentices, and before you know it, you'd have a business. Whereas now I think the difference between being kind of a local provider in a kind of a startup mode, you're going to have to be super niche, and ultimately you won't have your license to practice, which is quite a hard bit when you go up against probably a company like ours where we have that. And from a security perspective, can you take the risk? From a platform perspective, can you take the risk of any downtime?
Okay. And then in terms of you clearly have very, very high quality standards. You talked about your own hiring. You have very stringent kind of behavioural mapping to make sure you're getting the right people. Culture is very important in terms of the acquisitions you make. Does that make it pretty difficult in terms of finding targets to bring in? Are there lots of targets still out there? And what has been it's a sector that's been consolidating for a while now, isn't it? So how do you find that?
Well, it's interesting. It's kissing a lot of frogs. So I now have a new head of M&A who started, who's brilliant, and that has given me about a third of my diary back, which is amazing. Before she started, it was just a lot of calls, and it's just let it be known that we are interested and we're out there. And I love a bit like this today. I love talking to other founders of other businesses and understanding what they've done, what they're interested in. And so it's if it was a side hobby, it'd be great. It's just clearly what you can't do is mess people about. So you can't put offers in unless you really are looking to buy. And even then, we have to make the right decisions. If we make one, I can't make. It's one of those situations where you can't fail. So you can't make a bad acquisition. So I've met going on for, it will be over 100 conversations since July, and we've got seriously involved with probably about 20 or so, and made 2 acquisitions in that time. So it's been pretty full on.
So it's having a pretty tight funnel.
Yeah.
And in terms of the importance of culture and the values and behaviours that you've got within TSG, how quickly can you assess whether a business is going to be relevant from that perspective?
It's difficult. So I'll give you a great example. So we had Geeks down in Bristol who we acquired only back at the end of March. When I met the founder of that business, just knew immediately it was a great fit. And so a couple of weeks ago on Friday, the whole business got on a plane from Bristol and worked from our offices in Newcastle for the full day. And so they got an early flight so that they were there before any client demand came in, and then left afterwards. And so had a nice bit of social in between. You couldn't tell the difference between their guys sitting at our desks and our guys. And you got that immediately. So that founder, in a small business of 30 people, the founder's really important, or whoever that chief exec leader is. And so that's one way to look. Whereas other ones we've looked at, so our first one, Data, that was an acquisition where the founders wanted to go really quickly. And so we had to assess more about how well do we know that type of business? What do we think about the fundamentals of the people who are there? And can we kind of move their culture to be more like us? So they were very much in the office, 5 days a week. We're a hybrid working organization. There were a couple of bits that we knew there would need to be some change, but we thought it was close enough. And because they were really passionate about their clients, had a phenomenal NPS. So we felt like we knew there was a mapping to most of it, but we just have to loosen the reins a little bit in terms of how people were managed and what that looked like. And weirdly, that isn't for everyone.
Yeah.
And as you're out in the market assessing potential acquisitions, we deal with lots of invested businesses that are pursuing inorganic acquisition growth strategy. How tempting is it when you meet with a business that's really high performing, is growing, is producing loads of EBITDA, to say no to that as a potential target on those cultural grounds?
Yeah, really hard. So we pulled out from one actually in due diligence. So we'd even paid for the price of diligence, which is expensive, tens of thousands of pounds, right? And we just saw a few gaps in one of the founders, and we just didn't like how they ran the business, and we couldn't find that out until quite far down the process. And it really would help me around the board table to say, look, we've done 3 acquisitions, not 2, and it was very accretive in terms of the multiples that we are as a platform and they are as a local IT business, MSP. But that's where, you've got the right board around you. So I've got a great chairman, and genuinely our investors they really understand that if we choose the wrong fit, we're going to pay for it in the long term.
Yeah, and having that alignment for yourself, for the board, and the investors, so that you can go back and say, actually, I know on paper the numbers look great, but actually this is the wrong thing for the business. To have no dissenting voices around that around that call must be really reassuring in a CEO role.
It is, but I think the best way as well is about having a really good pipeline. So
Yeah.
you can say no to this as saying yes to something else.
Yeah.
And there's only so many things I can integrate at once. So that's having a really full pipeline is a great way to have those conversations.
Yeah.
If I didn't have that pipeline, then I would have had a harder job.
Sure.
I imagine also it's tempting where if the issue is perhaps potentially with the founder, and I imagine it's tempting, or we see with other clients, to think, well, they're not going to be around, we're buying it from them, they're going to go, we can work with them for a period and it'll be fine. But we've seen lots of instances where it can leave a long wake behind it, basically. If there is a leader whose culture you're not 100% with, then what they might leave behind, even if you do replace them in due course, might be quite difficult to wrangle around your way of thinking.
Yeah, and particularly because you don't get to meet any of the team.
Yeah.
And so you only get to meet the founders. Maybe some of the leadership team, they're the only people you'll see as part of the process. So we were unusual in our MBO where we signaled a couple of years out we were going to do it. And then we were super open all the way up. There were things obviously we had to keep in confidence, but we were pretty open about, this is the process, here's what it looks like, here's why we're doing it. Just so then when it then happened, it met all the expectations we'd already set. Whereas in pretty much all cases for these smaller businesses, there's that fear of, if I say something too early, I could really lose talent. And so normally you don't get any chance to meet anyone else other than founders. You don't even get to walk in the building. You can stalk stuff on LinkedIn or have a look on Google Maps and see what it looks like. But sometimes even some of those socials, perhaps everyone puts their best face on, so you don't really get a clear view.
Absolutely. So that's a nice segue into, you talked about your own MBO there. Do you mind just talking a little bit about that? So you signaled it early. Was it an exhaustive process? Did you meet lots of people? What led you to the investor that you chose?
Yeah, so we had a great CF provider who worked with us. It was almost like a full-time job. So generally for my CFO and I, we felt like we ran 2 jobs for about 6 months.
Okay.
It's not an unusual experience. I wouldn't wish my worst enemy through it, genuinely, in terms of, I've got a young family, my CFO's got a young family. That's just not to be repeated. And now I've got a better team around me. I think would be slightly more balanced in our approach. But we met with tens of different, I think it was like 30 odd different coffee chats, and it all sounded really good at the time, because again, it's that whole pipeline view. And I want lots of optionality, so I want lots of offers in a similar place. So then I can hopefully make the best decision. Better to have more options than less. And I also want to learn a lot about the PE market. So I want to meet lots of different types of funds and lots of different investors to see what it was like, and it was a real education. But it took up a lot of time.
Yeah. Would you do it differently if you did it again, or do you think the payoff for that and going into it with a real perspective?
Probably still do the same. Unfortunately, it doesn't sound very bright, but it's just I've now got a really good view of who's likely to be available next time. So many people we weren't ready for. So for us, we're a primary business, going from private to PE ownership. And so there were certain things that we need to sort of basically say, this is our business model, and then go and prove it over the next 4 years. So when we go back out to market, it's going to be really similar investors, but just slightly, those at a higher tier. Interestingly, Pictet, the guys who came in, were the sort of investor we expected next time around, not this time around. And so which is great in some ways, going from championship to Champions League,
Yeah.
but maybe, having a league, maybe a little bit in between, would have been helpful. But it's been really insightful in terms of, you wouldn't expect it, but small teams of investors are all really different in terms of personalities, what they care about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we were slightly unusual with things like a employee benefit trust, and just in terms of the ownership structure, and the way that we run is not typical. So things like we talked about, I don't want to go and buy and build with the wrong culture. I want to make that really clear early on. And the foundation we have as well, where we have a fixed piece of our profits going into that. That isn't as PE friendly as you might think. So so there were a few bits of making sure we talked to enough people who could really understand exactly what the offering was, and that we had that alignment.
And just going back a little bit, as a first-time CEO, I guess sort of two questions. What support did you have, either within the business or outside, to help you as you sort of grew into that CEO role? And then this experience of taking a business out to market, is something that for experienced CEOs is a really sort of time onerous and difficult thing to manage. How did you get yourself ready and personally prepared for all of that?
Yeah. So personally, I probably didn't do enough in terms of like my own, like the things I would have done personally in terms of physical health, and I would have taken more time off before we got started, or taking some time off in between. And the bit I hadn't really appreciated is, you finish the exercise and then you're into your first 100 days with PE. And really, I should tell all the management team, take time off now. So whilst we're in a bit of hiatus, and there's this new piece that can, like a security check that's done. It's kind of there's this sort of bit around, it's almost like in the Premier League, to see if you're a suitable owner type piece that's now done for any technology partner who's to do with national infrastructure. When we had that bit of hiatus, everyone should have taken leave at that point. We didn't. And so you can imagine we went straight from a 6-month intensive process into another 100 days and on through. So it feels like quite a few of my team did 3 years in 1 year. And you could just even see how much annual leave had been sort of carried over. It was just, we're talking like 30 days plus. It's too much, right? So would have done that differently. But in terms of the advisors, were brilliant. So David was our chairman. He sort of came from an M&A background, so he really understood it and had been preparing the ground for some time. And then we had a guy called Paul, who was an ex-PwC partner, who had gone with it, and he was there to advise the management team. So then, if there were any sort of, we had to make it work for both management and owners. So having an advisor to us who was just really understood the landscape. And then we appointed our CF advisor really early on, Lincoln. They were great, and they helped us with data preparation, other bits and pieces. So it was a long process, but actually we had really good advisors, and that was very helpful. And
I think that point about getting management specific advice is really bad. That doesn't always happen, and I think it is an oversight a lot of the time that an MBO team are kind of sleepwalked into a deal that they didn't have a lot of visibility over beforehand. They haven't had a lot of advice around, and they're just kind of presented with a deal at the end of it. So I think that's smart.
We definitely, particularly if you're a management team or in a fast growing business, you basically just feel massively thankful being able to do an MBO. So sometimes you don't feel although you do hold a lot of cards, you don't want to be ungrateful and say, look, can we get the advice? But actually it was a chairman who did it. So actually we're all advised initially, and then Paul, who was our advisor, then split off to just advise the management team.
That's
and it just worked really well. He was super balanced and really helpful just to make sure we're all lined up as we went through. So it's I'd highly recommend it.
And it's interesting on that earlier point. We often work with businesses as they're getting ready for a PE deal, and the focus of the conversations tends to be on quality of the leadership team. So maybe we need somebody who's got experience of doing a deal before. We need to have a PE ready team. We often try to talk to people just about capacity. There might be a quality issue that you need to add to the team here or there, but I think the time demand during that period, assuming all of your leadership team are working full-time running the business, you layer on a 6-month field process where they're kind of doing that full-time as well. It can be close to breaking point at times, and there can be lots of balls dropped if you haven't built in enough capacity at the start of that.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of having deputies you can leave alone for 2 weeks, maybe even 4 weeks at a time. So, do you have deputies? Could all your deputies run a board meeting and you're not even there? That's kind of the bar you need to get to. And I think it depends where you are in your cycle. So for us, we're going 300-person business, 40 million turnover. So we're at that tipping point where when we haven't really earned the right yet to have really good deputies for all of our senior leaders. By the time we come out of this cycle, we'll be over 100 million. Then absolutely we will. That's why weirdly I'm quite looking forward to the next process, in that we'll definitely have that extra capacity. So already we've got a couple of deputies who've come in, help with some of the M&A, and when they switch their focus from M&A to preparation for our own cycle, we'll have that a bit of extra bandwidth.
Yeah. That's it.
And thinking about the whole process, it's like first time CEO, with all these fireside chats going on with very friendly looking potential investors, and then straight into a 100-day plan post deal completing. During that process, any sort of moments of self doubt? How do you keep your sort of self confidence high that you're doing the right things, you're making the right decisions?
Yeah, I mean, constant self-doubt. I think any chief exec says they haven't got any self-doubt, maybe a bit of a worry.
Tampering a little bit with the truth, yeah.
Like all Elon
Yeah,
Musk.
yeah, but it's so constant self-doubt because particularly given the context. So economy felt like it took like a bit of a downturn after our deal as well, and so that probably hit us by about 10%. So we had to work a lot harder to hit the same numbers. So it didn't feel like you could take time out of the business to go and plan your value creation plan for the way forward. Fortunately, we hired a fantastic chairman to join, and so he was sort of number one choice by a long way, and he was really helpful in terms of running that value creation plan alongside keeping the core business running. Whether you like it or not, I'd like to say I did two jobs in one go, but normally the process takes precedence, and so you take your eye off the ball a little bit with clients, you take it off a little bit with some of the key initiatives in the business, and so you feel a bit sluggish, which is particularly when you've been at high tempo for a long period of time, it just causes a distraction.
And you had quite a lot of input into that chair selection, if I remember rightly. So can you sort of share a little bit about how you went about helping the investor find the right person for the business?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So you've got to be careful in that they've got to do their own due diligence. But I think right from the coffee chats, I sort of knew who. I like American football, so I do a lot of depth chart work where I'm potentially spotting a particular role that I think is critical. And so I often like to form a bit of a what are some of the key factors? So for me, it was somebody who'd been through a high growth sort of business, but also kept their culture intact, really cares about their clients and known for it. And then a really good marketeer if possible. And so on that list, there was really only one person and then a bit of a gap. And that was Paul, who we sort of successfully brought in. And I think just from the very first coffee chats, I was quite open about what our gap was around the table in terms of that CMO. We didn't have that role. And as we modernize as a business, what that role would look like for us, and finding a chairman who really got it in terms of culture. We've got our principles, and we see it as a virtuous circle in terms of great people, well enabled and engaged, drive great outcomes with clients. That then gives you shared growth, and they're not just things we put on the wall or put in brochures. And so getting a chairman who really understood that. And as odd as it sounds, people who've been commercially brilliant in our sector, many of them, they'll say the right things, but when we get to a really difficult scenario, I don't think they'd follow through.
Okay.
Interesting. Did you, and we spend a lot of time doing supporting our clients with appointing chairs, and it is always fascinating because often it's the first time a CEO has ever worked with a chair, and it's a very different dynamic to a normal colleague relationship that you would have. Did you spend much time in that process with Paul or with any of the other candidates talking about the practicalities of how you would work together, how often you would spend time with one another, how much the chair would be involved, how often they would visit site, whether they would have relationships with the wider team or just with you? Did you talk about that in advance, or just allow it to kind of run its own course?
It's really, I feel like I should have asked those questions now you've said that. But I think for me, it was just about do we hold the same principles? Like, do we know it's a lot of my recruitment is often around, do you do the right thing? So you don't always know what the right thing is until you maybe had a discussion. But once we know what it is, are we going to do right by customers, do right by people, and do right by shareholders? And can we create a straight line most of the time between those three things? And many of the chairmen I met with didn't have that same alignment. It was very much shareholders first, but I'll look after you as the chief exec and the management team. And that's not how they put it, but that's where you could see their focus was in terms of when you only get an hour with somebody. It's interesting where the share of voice sits. So who do they talk about? What do they talk about? Are they playing to your ego? Are they playing to greed effectively in terms of where you expect to get to, or do they genuinely feel like a mission? So weirdly, Paul, as our chairman, had worked at TSG in the past when we weren't at our best, and he really wanted another crack at working with us. And I think he had unfinished business from where he was previously. I don't want to speak for him, but ultimately you could tell it was personal, and he kept like, I want to disrupt the marketplace I'm in. That's more important. That's important, and taking our people and clients with us. And he really got the energy of that challenge. So you could get that. That's what was miles apart. So there would have been other really good functional people, great in a boardroom, but really I wanted more than that. I wanted someone who's going to challenge me and get me to think.
Yeah, it is interesting. We spend a lot of time, let's say, speaking to chairs for various opportunities,
Mm.
and that after we've told them a little bit about the business and opportunity, it is always interesting what they ask first, and is it the commercials and the likely return and who the buyer will be, and nothing wrong with that, of course.
Mm.
Is it the culture? Is it the management team? Is it some chairs are in it because they really enjoy the coaching element of it.
Mm.
Some people it's part of the role, but they're there to kind of drive the strategy. So yeah, that is interesting that you went in with such a clear view of what you wanted.
Yeah, and we've got a bit of an unusual setup where, we've got a really good head of marketing, but I'm not the best leader for them. I don't feel like I've given her the right sort of leadership in terms of I don't have that marketing background. Marketing is still a dark art to some degree.
Absolutely.
And so having like a really good leader. So weirdly, our chairman really leans into our marketing team, then kind of reports to me in terms of the board pack and what that looks like. But then is clearly the chair when we then get into a board meeting. And I think if you can build trust with somebody, you can work out where are my skills, where are your skills, and how do we complement each other.
Yeah.
And like we're pretty flat as a business. Like we've got the hierarchy when we need it. So when there's a governance piece or there's significant decisions needed, but most of the time it's just best idea wins.
Okay. And what does the next 3 to 5 years look like for TSG then?
Yeah, so it's pretty high growth. So we're going from just over 40 million to over 100 by the time we get to 28, and maybe even a bit more if we really leverage some of the things we're working on. We've got some really interesting new products we've put to market, so particularly around cyber and cloud. So quite a bit of automation in the background,
Okay.
and really around focusing on identity in cyber rather than just the traditional SOC. And from a cloud perspective, really thinking about how we optimize cloud to save clients money. And so we've got some really nice visual dashboards of how we save clients between 10 and 30% on their cloud footprint. And look, based on the market where we are, I need to provide enterprise level services with the NPS that I talked about, but try and save you money at the same time. So that's a hard challenge, right?
Sounds easy.
And the best way to do it is to do it at scale. And that's where we're now at that tipping point of enterprise level expertise, some of the Microsoft tooling that we've got, and some of our own sort of developments that we've done over the last couple of years. Bringing all that to market at the same time is pretty exciting. So we think these two particular propositions will really underpin our growth, as well as smart acquisition.
Okay.
So
how much of that growth do you think will be through acquisition and how much through organic growth?
So it sounds made up when I say 50-50, but it is genuinely 50-50. But it's a 50% of bringing things in where we can cross-sell and upsell in terms of retain the clients and then make it a no-brainer for them. Well, look, if I trust you with my finance systems and that side, then why wouldn't I choose you as a cyber provider? Or if you look after me from a core IT perspective, why wouldn't I look at you from some of the business applications rather than giving out to a random third party? Yeah.
So it always fascinates me that I think it's pretty common knowledge that on average M&A, you take it as a global perspective, destroys value. There's and a lot of the synergies that people are optimistically hoping for don't emerge. I often think that that's because the fabled cross-sell is a lot harder to pull off than people might imagine. Have you given a lot of thought to that? Is it working for you guys, the cross-sell as you bring new brands on?
Yeah, so if you think about the three pillars we've got, which is business applications, cyber, and cloud, more than 50% of our clients take all three from us today, and they didn't when they started with us. So that's a pretty good level of cross-sell.
Yeah.
But that's a different challenge to what you've said, which is, can I go and acquire a business? Can I turn their sales team into evangelists and a proper client success approach? Can I get those clients to really buy into the forward view that we have of technology? That's tough. We think about little else, to be pretty honest. So a lot of it has meant upgrading our client success team and actually putting client success managers in where some of these smaller businesses don't have that. They often talk about a longer tail. We don't want to have a tail. We want every client to be managed and every client to have access to lots of different value-added services. So an example of that is our academy, something I wanted to do for years, we needed 2 years ago, which is kind of a free training platform. So it's a mixture of in-person and kind of like virtual events, live sessions, but also some recorded content. And so we've got now about over 5,000 users using it every quarter, and over 1,000 of our clients using it actively, which is brilliant. And it's a free value-added service, so we don't charge for that. And there's a few things like that we do that are a little bit different, but we genuinely think we've made some pretty safe bets with Microsoft and some of the sort of third parties that we pull in and around it. And our view is if we educate clients to look at it and we offer it at the right price point, and if we guarantee the NPS around it, then it should be a natural next step to at least evaluate or try us out for that kind of for that next step. And if we do that, then that's cross sell. But the important bit is not to call it cross sell. The important bit is to say, as client success advisors, do you believe in the things that we're putting out there? Like, we've had plenty of products that we've tried to put out and it's just a non-starter, or we think it looks great technically, but we can't translate it for a client, or the price point's out. And so what looks really successful is actually a load of failure with a few things that are brilliant that then clients take the next step with. And so it's that kind of constantly trying to find the right angle and the right proposition, particularly for SMEs who they want to be smart followers, but they also want something that's a bit innovative or something that's different. So it's a real challenge.
Interesting. And we talked about how competitive and relatively sort of fragmented the market is that you operate in and you're scaling in. How much time do you take to sort of magpie good ideas from the businesses in the space, or keep an eye on competitor behaviours? You seem, obviously, you've got a very clear idea of how you want TSG to run. Yeah, how much visibility have you got on other businesses that are doing well in your space?
Yeah, so I talk to a lot of our competitors and I share what it is that we're doing, because the things that we're doing are really hard to do. NPS is all about culture, hiring, complete commitment to client experience. So, like, I can tell you exactly how we do it, and I'll share it with competitors and then get some ideas from them, because it's really hard to replicate what it is that we do, because it's not like a bit of code or a quick configuration, or we hadn't thought of that third party tool. I wish it was that simple, to be honest. So it's kind of a combination of pieces together. So I talk quite openly about some of our pricing, where we take a lot of open book pricing as well. So again, we have this concept of a fair value price. So we probably have some of the lowest margins on things like kit and other bits and pieces, where we have like a flat 10% basically across everything that we do, and we're very open about what that looks like. So we give our purchasing power to our clients, which is a very some people, that's like a complete anathema. They're like, well, why the hell would you do that? You're losing, anything from kind of 12 to 20% of your margin. But our view is that if we share that up front and other value added services, then you trust us. We'll never abuse that trust. Therefore, we become a default option, and that's where that kind of cross sell comes from. So it's just a slightly different way of working. But and so a lot of clients, when we did the customer success approach, a few competitors aped it, and I got really into having a working group and working with a few competitors. Say, oh, I'd love if you did this too, because genuinely, I'm not just doing this just for us. It's also about kind of changing the perception of how partners are seen. Because often we're seen as cherry pickers, or only there when there's a distress purchase needed, or sometimes selling things that perhaps don't give the outcome, or selling the dream on an apps project and then leaving you high and dry. And I really want to reverse that trend and perception.
That's fascinating and really unusual that you would be sharing your innovative models with your competitors. There'll be a lot of people out there listening, saying they can't quite imagine doing that. As you were going through your process, and was it easy enough to get your investor comfortable with that? That's how you operate as a business? Yeah,
because if you get into detail on it, you can't replicate it until you're kind of the same size as us, because you can't afford to have, the best part of £500,000 that you spend on an academy that you then give away for free. Like, how many businesses can do that, right? Or the customer success approach. I mean, that really hurt us before it came good. So we went backwards on sales before we went forwards. People didn't trust for it, because in the business go, but I've still got some targets, right? You do, but don't sell stuff that the client doesn't need. And so it takes a while for people to get comfortable with that customer success model. It's not an overnight. You've got to spend 3 years to go backwards at least for the first year. So it's a sort of thing, again, it's quite hard to replicate unless you fully commit. It's a combination of the parts that all come together, and that creates a very different experience. So most investors then get really paranoid and go, well, what about the IP, and what can you, and trust, there's some bits of our cyber offering, which is, a lot of it's our own code, it's our own configuration. That is obviously locked away IP. But in the service design piece, it's not, because I tend to find if you share it with others, you want to get their view. We also share it with our clients and say, look, where are we not getting this right? We're kind of a bit obsessive about, if we don't get an NPS of plus 80, people start, really getting distressed about it, which is great. And so we talk a lot to our clients about, look, individual experiences, how can we make it better? And there's lots of niche things sometimes you just don't think about. And doing service design across over 1,000 clients is quite a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So delving a little bit more into you and your background, do you mind, when you joined TSG, was it 7, 8 years ago now?
Yeah, 8 years, yeah.
Was that with an ambition to one day be CEO? And if it was, when did that ambition start? Had you been building your career with that in mind?
Yeah, so I think I'm a bit of a reluctant chief exec, which, given the meteoric sort of rise, I guess, from where I got to, and where I think David always had a mind of, like, I need a successor. The MBO was really about his retirement, and it was well earned. So I think it was more apparent to him than it was to me, if that makes
Okay.
sense. I just had a career of really exciting transformation programs and getting excited about tech and people, and just sort of changing something, disrupting in some way. And then I think with TSG, it was doing that transformation program meant working at all levels and across the whole business. Then being chief operating officer was sort of being David's deputy, and
Okay.
then it felt like a really natural next step to then become chief exec. And I thought I really understood going from COO to chief exec, but like anyone else, you get the imposter syndrome and you get all the other stuff that goes with it. Funny, it seems a bit odd, but I've been in the business for over 4 years. Felt I really knew everything, and so I wasn't really expecting that.
Yeah.
So what was it that felt so different?
The really obvious things, and it's a feeling. So when I was chief operating officer, I think of the 250 people that we were, I think I looked after like 210 of them, 220 of them. So it felt like I was in charge of every project. Got involved in a lot of the pre-sales. So I felt like I had that end-to-end responsibility. But what I hadn't quite appreciated is that every major client, every major vendor, everyone in the business just looks at you differently. And I used to exist in this wonderful space where I could just be a bit of an agitator for stuff, or let's try out this idea. It was always very safe, so I could kind of go off the
Yeah.
deep end, and then our chairman could kind of rein me back in and go, maybe not, good idea, maybe in the future, but try this out. Or so suddenly you have to really start moderating your language and how you talk. So I'm quite direct, and I had to sort of start thinking about how I couch things that I say. So I always want to be. We've got this radical candor approach, so to be really open, but there's just being more thoughtful about the words that I use and just being less reactionary and just trying to be slightly more measured in my approach. That sounds an odd thing, but sometimes people take a lot more from every conversation, even if it's just making a coffee with them or just small things you might say that might be their interaction for 3-4 months. And just being more mindful about that sort of role and the fact that you're leading with others. So I just remember when it was announced that I was going to succeed from David, 6 months away from when that was going to happen as chief exec, and then moving to chairman. Then suddenly everyone just started talking to me differently, and it's like everything smelled of white, of white paint, if you know what I mean. Like, so before I used to get involved in lots of service issues, or I'd be involved in an idea or something else. Suddenly everything was, well, we'll just iterate that idea a bit more before we take it to Rory, or that client issue. That's fine. We'll sort that out before we take it to him. And I wasn't used to that, and so I had to realize my role had changed, and I had to conduct myself differently to be invited into those rooms again, or give people the space to operate, but equally kind of make sure it was a safe space, if that makes sense.
That's fascinating.
It's an odd thing, and also just for myself, I was something like, shit, I'm in charge of this organization. It's just me. I could run us to ruin or success, and it's just this psychological thing that you just suddenly go, oh, I'm not worthy of this, or this is not. If this roller coaster ride ends, this is, I doubt I'd be doing the same somewhere else. And you have all these weird emotions that sort of kick around because we all, it's imposter syndrome, right? And it hits you quite hard. I think it was about 12 weeks, 3-4 months, something that really wrestled with it, probably privately, because you need to put game face on. Fortunately, I had some really good people around me. So I was part of a Vistage group at the time, which is like a peer of chief execs. And they were just brilliant. People said, just watch out for this. This might occur. And when it did, I could just have some really open conversations. And I was like, I feel like a bit of an idiot. I don't feel like I'm quite up to this challenge. And they were like, no, you are an idiot, but you are definitely up for the challenge and keeping me grounded. So that was great.
And having been such a key support to a CEO in a COO role, easy for me to say, how have you gone about putting together a team that reports into you that enables you to focus on the areas of the CEO role that you need to, and have trust that all the things that you were doing previously as COO are all getting done to an equally high standard?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's quite hard to follow, I think. So I've got a fantastic COO and someone I've been chasing for years. Rob, absolutely fantastic chief operating officer. But interestingly, I was chief exec and COO, I think, for about a year, maybe certainly at least a year longer than I should have been. So I didn't make that transition as much. I just tried to do 2 jobs at once, and that didn't quite give me the distance to be able to do that. And so bringing someone in, they've obviously got different ideas, but clearly you just need to work out where the boundaries are. So for me, I'm still obsessed about NPS, and I've got this nice role where I can kind of dip into things and kind of add ideas, but equally when I get told, well, maybe just back out of that for now. We're trying to achieve something. I'll also give space where needed. So I'm really lucky that I appointed my chief operating officer, our CFO. We've been through thick and thin, and that MBO process kind of capped it. But really trust the numbers. He's an unusual accountant in that he really understands the business and really cares about the business. And although I tease him about being miserly, he genuinely will invest in good ideas. He's quite critical of mine most of the time, which is also what it is you need. And then for us, the sales position, that was always a tough one. And I think now we've got somebody around the table that shares the same values. We had a couple of really good people with great values in the past, but perhaps the results weren't quite there. Then we had someone who had achieved great things, but not with the right values. And now I've got someone who's got both. So it's just really nice to have that around the table.
Okay, great. I always think it's fascinating. Nobody starts life as a CEO, so everybody kind of comes to it from a different route, whether it be finance or commercial or technical. What do you think in your background has helped you as you've moved into that CEO seat? And do you think are there any elements of the role or elements of the business where you touched on marketing a little bit before, where you feel a little bit more out of your comfort zone, and how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, so I guess my key skill sets were around some of the people bit. So the HR element, I guess, in terms of like culture and genuine. And I had some great examples of really good cultures and some really bad examples that I won't go into today. But that really showed me how not to create a culture in a business. So I think that was generally one of the big bits. Clearly, we're a tech business, so I'm an engineer by background, and and the project management piece around like execution of the plan, whatever that plan is, whether you want to be highfalutin and call it strategy, or you want to just get into what are the tactical things we have to achieve to survive through whatever period. So they were super helpful. But I was not a natural finance guy. That's not my bag. I can stare at numbers in a spreadsheet if I have to. I like to go with headlines and drive my CFO wild by just saying, well, if it's roughly about, and he's like, no, are these your numbers or my numbers, right? And we have this joke quite a bit. And again, what I found was a really good CFO where I trust his numbers, and we talk every day. And so it's just about having that combination. Now, clearly, I've had to sharpen on my numbers, but there's still an element of making sure you've got the right people around you that get it.
Okay.
And same with my COO. I wanted someone who was great at keeping a consistency of high service, whereas often I would make too many changes or have too many ideas. And sometimes, look, some of them were great, some of them were not, and they could just be disruptive. So it's about finding that right balance.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Also, I was to say, and then in terms of now being a little way into this investment cycle, you talked about a very sort of forensic evaluation of all the different potential investors before you settled on Pictet. Have they been as you expected them to be so far?
That's a good question. Yeah, they've lived up to every expectation they've set. So things like setting up the employee benefit trusts, keeping the TSG Foundation, backing us on acquisition, and helping us initially with sort of some of the M&A approach, and actually lending us quite a bit of their resource in their team. They're quite a new team, so that's actually disproportionately a lot of effort that they've put in for what is sort of a newer fund. And they've delivered on all of those things. But equally, now we've got our own sort of head of M&A, but also backing out, and they really respect our if myself and our chairman, if we think this is where the industry is going, then they really will, they want a little bit of outside information, but they really will back us. So
do they have prior knowledge of the sector?
No, I mean, they're not more of a, I mean, they're quite a diverse portfolio. So I guess the honest answer is no, other than they've looked at quite a few other tech companies. And I think if you've done a DD process on a few different tech outfits, and these guys are super, I mean, these are very, very bright people. So they've got a really good grasp quite quickly. Some of it more superficial than others, but genuinely, like they do get it. But they don't try and pretend to get it on the really important points, or the bit around culture, or why is it hard to integrate an MSP. They kind of they take some of that on face value, but then they'll ask the right questions to get comfort. And so on all of those fronts, pretty happy, to be honest. And they're taking very much a kind of a 4-year mindset, and there's no lack of investment, which is always a slight concern, right? The PE reputation is they'll come in and start ripping out costs, which is just not happened at all. And they care just as much about our NPS as we do, because there's a bit of an argument for saying we're a little bit wasteful in terms of, an NPS plus 60 probably would keep as many clients, or how much do we spend on the differential, right? But they don't go down that road. They get that it's a way of us differentiating, and it's quite hard to stagger your service in some way. So
Yeah.
it's better to have that kind of CX myth and have that inbuilt in the business, so they
Yeah.
get it.
You mentioned EBT. For people listening or watching who aren't aware of what an EBT is, could you explain that and also why it's of fundamental importance to the business?
Yeah, so it's an employee benefit trust,
Mhm.
and what that means is our employees will benefit in the upside of TSG. So very likely we're now PE-backed, and so in 4 years' time, when we look for investment again, it means that employees will benefit at that point. So they have a shareholding in the business, and so it means there's a kind of working group who sort of represent people within our employees within TSG, but ultimately collectively they're going to share in the upside. So in effect, it's a trust that means that every employee is a shareholder, and it's not just employees we have today, but that's new people who join, and then when we make acquisitions, after 12 months, we're going to enter those people coming from acquisition into the EBT as well.
And what underpins the belief that that's the right thing to do?
It was a big thing for me knowing I had the right leadership team that we diluted to make that happen, and it was great to be backed by our investor to allow that to happen because it's an unusual. I think it's becoming more common, but it's
We are
something
seeing it
that
more and more in the market. It's still very rare, but we are seeing them. It's great to see.
it was great to see a leadership team that go like, we want to dilute to give that upside. For me, it makes total sense in that we want our people to think like owners and to go above and beyond. Oh, I get a lot of discretionary effort. The vast majority of our NPS score comes from discretionary effort. So yes, we benchmark. Yes, we have a good culture. Yes, we have some good benefits, but it's the last thing for us to be able to provide. And so it's that kind of and it's the feeling of ownership rather than just the pounds and pence. So it could be worth tens of thousands of pounds for every employee, which is great. But I think it's more the feeling of ownership, that genuinely we're writing to them to say you're part of something bigger. You own part of this journey.
Okay. And thinking about the investors that you spoke to going through that transaction, were there some for whom that was something that they wouldn't have felt comfortable supporting?
Well, none of them said that, but people did disappear
Okay.
from some of the cultural conversations. So, and it might just be maybe I sound a little bit naive. I'm quite a young chief exec too. So, some other bits where I think there's an end-to-end story about hiring great people, get them really invested in the business to then drive outcomes for your clients, which then drives the outcomes for the business. But if you follow that logic, then an EBT is a really natural conclusion to come to. But it is slightly unusual in that way.
It's great to hear you did it for absolutely the right reasons.
Mm.
As a positive side effect of that, have you noticed that in terms of your own recruitment and in terms of your acquisition plan, it is an additional, very nice
Yeah.
carrot?
I mean, I would say most of our employees still don't get it quite yet. And I think it's something that will mature over time. So look, we've just gone through an investment year. So we've had a pretty good year, but it's not like the EBT is now worth something dramatic, which will get them off their seats. And I think they're not quite used to it yet and what it means. So we feather it into different conversations talking about, well, what do you, I keep saying, well, you're a shareholder. So what, think like a shareholder. What is it you would do if it was your money, right?
Yeah.
And so that sort of stuff is starting to come in. And it's making people a little bit bolder about maybe different suggestions.
Okay.
But definitely on the recruitment side, it's made us an employer of choice.
Okay.
I think there's a combination of factors, but I believe it's one of the 4 or 5 things that attracts people to us, and it kind of proves the culture. Like I'm always big into, well, okay, you say you've got a great client experience or great people experience, like show me. So on the people side, it's slightly tougher. Yes, we go for like be heard and great place to work, but I think if you say, we make you a shareholder in the business, I think it kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people talk, and it's a nice way of sort of following through. And then from a broader industry perspective, I think clients really like it too.
Yeah.
So when we talk about, okay, we're going to enter into a 5-year managed services contract, we're going to outsource or co-manage our IT department. How can you guarantee you're going to have the same resources? And in helping me, we talk about our tenure being more than 10 years, which is quite unusual in our industry.
Yeah.
And then but that just sounds like a soundbite. But if you then follow it to say, well, actually, look, we've made people shareholders in the business.
Yeah.
We already had a great culture, but now there's, they genuinely feel ownership. It just gives clients that sort of reassurance as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic.
Yeah. And I'm hoping in the future, at the next round of investment, we can do the same again, but on a slightly bigger stage. I don't think there's always a balance, I think, but I don't necessarily want to always be completely employee owned. Just in that, I think it's useful to have investors and people who push you to do more. I've seen a couple of businesses where they've maybe crept backwards in terms of being just a bit sort of navel gazing or thinking about them, whereas you want to have that exact link between shareholders, clients, and your people. And I think having that maybe majority owned, but then always having that outside investment, which would keep you honest. So I'd like to continue the journey, but I don't know whether I'd want to be in a full employee owned scenario.
Yeah.
And in terms of the time that's passed since the transaction took place, I guess one of the things that keeps that relationship healthy and positive is the business remaining on track. So looking back to the sort of plan that was shown to all the different investors prior to finding the right one, is the business performed as expected?
Yeah, we have. I mean, in line, I think one of the things we hadn't quite anticipated was the market being as tough as it has been. So it had already felt like selling into a recession, and it just got that little bit worse before the elections, and quite a few bits around tax and other bits and pieces that have sort of, I think, got a few business owners and particularly SMB owners to kind of just pause. And I would say probably there wasn't enough investment previously by small businesses in technology. But there's always going to be those runaway stars that perhaps are acquisitive, or they use tech as a platform for growth rather than seeing it as an overhead. But when you've got a customer base of 1,500, you really need all of them to be switched on in some way. And so I think we saw probably about a third of our base not as active as we would have liked against the plan and the assumptions we made. But we've managed to get ourselves back to expectation, but it was probably a lot harder than it should have been. So I think they may have thought there might be more upside rather than getting us back to plan, if that makes sense. But then I would say on the M&A side, I think we've come out the gate quite a bit quicker than expected with quality. So yeah, they've been kind in the board meetings so far. So it's good. But our organic engine is something that we want to see more from, and that's why we launched these propositions. So yeah, it's difficult because often the plan, it's kind of a sales process, but it's also like setting expectations for the next 4 years. And I think that's one of the things that I think next time around I would probably spend more time setting more expectations on the variables and what that looks like, maybe take more of a risk, just because you're going to live with that plan for the next 4 years. And there might be lots of little caveats about if this or then that, or there's a range. When you're working with a CF advisor, clearly they're going to give the top value for the top value. So I think there's just a little bit of maturity maybe going through that process where I should set up like different expectations. But thankfully we're there on plan, so it's all everything's fine. It ends on number, but probably a little bit harder to get there than expected.
Okay. You mentioned the board meetings. Has there been a discernible difference in how board meetings are conducted? If you were talking to a business owner or somebody going through MBO and you were looking to characterize what it's like being the CEO of a PE-backed board, is it a lot different than what you'd experienced previously?
Yeah, I think we were well prepared, but not. It might not be as. So there's some big differences there. So we've gone from quarterly board meetings to monthly board meetings, and the monthly board pack is a straight take from our sort of data warehouse and BI. So it's all data driven, and it's microscopic in terms of some of the detail, right, as expected. And I think we prepared the business by. I'm really into John Doerr's Measure What Matters, and really into OKRs and making it really clear about what it is that every employee needs to hit in terms of their role and how that leads to the overall business. That's sort of been a fundamental piece that we put in as part of the transformation program almost 8 years ago. But that's really helped because we almost have like a forensic level of detail for every individual and how they contribute to customer success. And so all you're really looking for is that same theme throughout the board pack. So we already had that data because effectively everyone who's on our service desk has a dashboard that says, here's what your personal NPS is, here's what your productivity looks like, and here's what we expect in your role. We benchmark every role as well, which is a bit unusual in terms of what your value is working at that level with those certifications and so on. So we needed a lot of the data to run our company anyway. It's just we didn't always use that in the board meetings because often the board meetings were hitting the numbers, we're on track, limited questions, or we're happy to invest in X, Y, and Z, which was actually great in a way because it sort of gave you a month of just really a quarter, of really focusing on the business.
Yeah.
Whereas the difference now is you're preparing the board pack into week 1 and 2, your board meetings in week 3 or 4. So actually the time to run the business and then talking about it in a board meeting are pretty close together.
Yeah.
So you don't have that. There's no rest period. It's constant themes and consistency and making sure the data backs you up. So it's a very different, very, as you'd expect, very data driven.
Yeah. Sounds like you were in a phenomenally good place to take on board an external investor. You've got all of that data. I don't think there are many privately owned businesses are running their business with that much data supporting.
I think so. I mean, there's always bits you can brush up on, right? Or you think you've got good data until you go through commercial due diligence and financial due diligence. So there's definitely some bits for us to work on. But I think that's the same. Who has the perfect data, right?
Yeah, indeed. And we as a business actually use OKRs as well. But do you mind just going into a bit more detail on that? Because I think that hopefully there'll be some people listening to this who aren't familiar with the concept. We've found them really useful as a business. Do you mind just sharing how you've used them?
Yeah, so it's kind of a thing that was really popular in the States, and then it sort of came over here, about maybe 10 years ago. And I think John Doerr's book was a really good one, where the book is great because it has a really simple concept in like 30 pages, and then just has loads of examples as to how it was applied
Yeah.
in different businesses, which is better than some business books where they've got one idea, they try and spread it over 250 pages, right? Rather than just giving the example. So the idea of an objective and key result, or OKR, is that you normally want to focus on probably just three at any one time, and to make it super clear that these are the things you need to go and focus on. So if I take it in our example, we often have net promoter score for pretty much every role with it. And then you then have some sort of commercial piece. So whether you're in a service role and you need to be productive, or you're in a sales role, there's often a commercial target. And then for us, there's normally like a personal or a team kind of continuous service improvement piece. So that's probably the three objectives that we would have. And what's really helpful with that is, particularly when you're in a hybrid working environment, and email and Teams and all sorts of stuff is pretty relentless, and you can get yourself super distracted on lots of things if you want to. It's really good to have if all else catches fire, what are the three things that I'm going to be measured on, like what really matters? And the reason why it's measure what matters is that you have to think really hard. So it's one of those, that saying that I think it's a Churchill quote, where I'm sorry I didn't have time to write you a shorter letter. It's kind of that if you can't think of what your OKRs are, you're not thinking enough, and you need to spend more time on it. But if you get them really crisp and you get them embedded, then it's amazing how much management time that kind of takes away. And you almost get to where we are, for the most part, is that coaching mentality of saying, here's the bar and you need to jump over it. So I don't need to be telling you what to do. I can just stand by the side of you and say, how do I get you over that bar? Now, if you don't get over that bar, we'll let you go. And we've got probably about a third of people who get into probation with us don't complete. We're pretty meticulous, and that's OKR driven. And then also, we expect consistent performance. It's not one bad game and we cut you. We're not a sports team, but also we're not a family. We see it as like a community piece. You've got to keep contributing. You have a bad couple of seasons, we'll always support you, but ultimately there's a limit, right? In terms of you've got to be able to produce, because we're a growing business and we all want to benefit from it. But the way to do that is just to hold the bar in the right place. So then the OKRs do a lot of that for you. And normally people will come to you and say, look, I can't hit that bar. How do I get over that bar? What does that look like? And ultimately, it lets you take much more of a coaching mentality. If that makes sense. How do you guys find it?
We adopted them 3-4 years ago, and we use them on a business-wide basis. We haven't. Everybody has individual targets across various things. There's lots of what you were saying there. There are real parallels. We measure productivity, we hope, in a reasonably unique way in our sector, and give people quite a lot of freedom within a framework, but overall do get a score at the end of each week. And everybody knows what their targets are in terms of that. Everybody understands what their commercial targets are as well, and everybody really understands our values, in that if we're talking about promotion at the end of the year, they need to have done a certain amount aligned with our values to be able to demonstrate it. So I think we probably aren't far off what you described there. We use the OKRs for the business rather than individuals, but I think that sounds like the next step. It's really interesting to hear.
In a much smaller headcount business, it's also a way that we can get everybody involved in business improvement areas and make sure that everyone's got a voice and is able to contribute to improvement, innovation. And that's certainly helpful in a business of our size.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've divided our OKR groups around key areas of the business, whether it be marketing, operations, and that's for volunteers to join each one to keep moving those areas forward and come up with new OKRs for that area of the business. It works well.
Oh, brilliant. We cheat slightly, so sometimes we use KPI. If you follow it strictly, sometimes we've got KPIs rather than OKRs, but the main thing is just like, what are the three things that I'm going to be measured on, and what do I need to focus on? One of the big things that it took me a while to notice, and it was in a different business that then we brought to TSG, is that it really helps with flexible working. So if you want to get away from managing attendance and you want to be managing performance, the best way to do that is to say, this is what matters. Like, these are the things that really matter. Clearly, there needs to be a behavioral bit behind it. So you need to make sure that, for me, it's like a behavioral switch. You want to have that conversation right at the time if there's an issue. So that bit doesn't go away. That's all the time. That doesn't wait for a quarterly review or whatever. But if you're really clear on these are the three things, then someone has to go home because the boiler's broken, or they want to pick up their kids early from school, or whatever it might look like. If they hit their OKRs, you won't care, fundamentally. So if you get the right OKRs, it's really freeing for a management team. But honestly, your people will really feel that sometimes it feels like it's more command and control to almost set these sort of measures, but they're actually quite freeing for a lot of people.
We find exactly the same thing. We come up with the framework where you get an overall productivity score and said, we're not going to micromanage each component part of that. You know what's expected of you in terms of, and we hold ourselves to it as well. We know what's expected in terms of output per week. Now go and do it from where you want, when you want, but everybody knows the bar. Yeah, it is free.
You got to be full. You got to be full in. So if people don't hit those OKRs, right? Well, first of all, you got to choose what matters, and you got to be like religious about it and say they absolutely do matter. So if you only hit those 3 things, I could live with that. In fact, I promote you on it. And if you didn't hit them, I wouldn't promote you on it, regardless of any other, soft factors. Because you need to be measuring the right things, but it's got to be consistent in everything you do. So every pay rise, every promotion, every recruitment. So we talk about people when they're joining the business. This is what your OKRs will be. This is what it'll look like. Just make sure you're really comfortable with that. We've had it in sales roles where some of our targets are quite high in comparison to some of our competitors. We have to explain why that's achievable, but we need to get them to like sign up to it like early on, and then it's just about being consistent all the way through. And in the non-obvious ways of, sometimes you can get it wrong and you have to be like, right, well, we've got it wrong. Let's do a reset and just make sure that it's not just box ticking. Otherwise, we just added overhead to the business and none of the freedom, right? Because
it brings clarity to management conversations as well. Doesn't it?
But it's not easy, right? So some things that seem really simple to us now, if you ask people in our business, they say, oh, I know what my 3 things are, but that's because we've had like 4 or 5 years of kind of going around the block of knowing what's worthwhile and what's not.
Yeah. And when you're talking to potential businesses to acquire, and you go into this detail, what's the initial response to all of this from the businesses you're talking to? Is it slightly intimidating to know you're such a data-led, well-targeted, clinical business, or do people typically embrace that?
I think the problem is you're in a sales cycle, right? So I always talk it through, at least at a high level. It's that kind of, the Kubler-Ross change curve where you get that bit where people go through like denial and all these frustration, all that sort of stuff. You're going to get that with everyone in the business at some point, because they're going to go, well, why am I being measured this way rather than that way? Or, even just telling people they can work from home rather than having to be in an office. Weirdly, that'll cause frustrations because people, it just change, people adapt to change in different ways. So upfront, people will tell you, absolutely, totally signed up to this new way of working. But then you just got to keep going back over that ground and explain, well, why does that matter? So for us, we talk about having a benchmark performance against the benchmark salary. So every year we give everyone a top reward statement and say, if a recruitment agency talked to you today, they'd value at this. This is what we're willing to pay you based on the following factors. And we're quite open about it. And so because we're Brits as well, we don't like talking about salary. So we make sure there's at least an annual conversation where we talk about salary in that way. And the OKRs bit all feeds into it to say, I can pay you a benchmark salary because you're giving a benchmark performance. So if you succeed in these things, that's why we have great benefits. We've got better benefits than most of the small businesses, but also why we can pay competitive salaries and so on. So you just have to make sure it's just consistent in all messaging all the time. And to be honest about it, last 12 months, part of the process, we slipped a little bit backwards, and actually we're renewing our sort of commitment to OKRs this year. So it's one of these things that takes a lot of focus.
Interesting.
In our conversation today, you've referenced some books, some things that you've come into contact with that have influenced the way that you've made decisions and know how the business is run. Are there any other people or materials that have influenced how you operate in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an avid reader, so actually, and Blinkist and use all that sort of stuff to really try and get through as much detail as possible. I think I'm going over some previous books I've read before. So one is Coaching at Work by David Bungay. That's a sort of good coaching book. It's written in a very tongue-in-cheek sort of style, and it just talks to you as if you're an overworked manager, but you still need to find time to coach. So it's quite like that one. I read that one probably every year, just because
refresh that one.
Yeah, just sometimes when you're short on time, sometimes coaching goes out the window and you start directing without meaning to. So that's one. And then today we're looking at Business Model Canvas as a really simple business model generation, it's called, like 20 quid on Amazon, but it's a really simple way of seeing a business for an overall piece. And it's something that we get a lot of our consultants and our customer success managers to use with their clients. So that's something that, again, just in a snapshot on a page, have you understood that business? Do you get their context? That's another good one. Yeah.
And you mentioned you're also in a peer-to-peer group as well, which I imagine you take a lot of that's a development opportunity as well.
Yeah, definitely. And we brought a lot of that into the business. So some of the speakers that we have in some of those peer groups, we've been able to get similar level speakers come and talk to our leaders across the business. We've got about 30, 38 leaders, I think, across the business. And we get kind of world-class speakers come in and talk to them. And it's a really good investment because we're all speaking similar language and it's just showing a bit of investment, and it's not as expensive per head as you might think.
Yeah. I'm in a similar peer-to-peer group,
Yeah.
and we've now signed up a number of our management team to go, and they have access to the same speaker group.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really useful.
Yeah.
Useful. Okay, good. And I think I know the answer to this, given that you've said that you're an avid reader, but I always like to ask, how much of your leadership style would you say is just natural and it's just you being you, and how much of it is carefully thought through and planned in advance?
Yeah, so I mean, I run a lot on instinct. I think a lot of people do. I mean, I try and hold back some of those instincts in terms of being too excitable or, you know, getting the first word and you're waiting to, you know, to speak last in a group and that sort of stuff. So there's a few things that I have to be really deliberate on and hide frustrations, or sometimes when the answer is obvious, but it's not about me having the answer, it's about other people like getting it. And particularly around some of the coaching piece, that's very deliberate, you know, biting the inside of your cheek, sitting on your hands, you know, really thinking it through and just spending the time and pausing. So I'd say, you know, about 2/3, you know, habitual instincts and a third of, you know, deliberate effort. I probably need to do more deliberate effort if I was being honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then we always kind of ask all of our guests a question at the end, which is if it sounds like particularly the latter part of your career has gone rapidly. So maybe this is a question for 5 years' time. I don't know. But if there was one thing that you could speak to your younger self about, what would that be? What would you change, or what do you wish you'd known earlier in your career?
Yeah, but probably two things if that's okay.
Of course.
I think one of them was
You can have three if you like, that's fine.
But I think one of them is just skip university.
Wow.
I would much rather have chosen a really good employer and chosen a really good manager that would have taken me under their wing, because that's what happened after university.
Yeah.
I worked for a really good program manager who taught me everything he knew. And that was fundamental. That grounded me for my career. So, you know, I thanked two people. I thanked my parents, and then I thanked my wife. Remember that. Whoops. And then three. But, you know, you always thank family, right? But then the other, you know, so the program manager was a key person I always still go back to and thank, because they didn't have to take a risk on me and didn't have to, you know, teach me everything they knew. And that sort of finding someone really good in a workplace, I think, is worth far more. And you can always go back to education. You can read this. You've got the access to information now is unreal, and in terms of all the different sources you've got, but creating and you know, keeping the time. But I just wouldn't make that investment. Now, I'm lucky I was in tech. You can be self-taught in tech. In fact, if you want to be cutting edge in tech and AI right now, I wouldn't go to university. I just wouldn't. And that's quite controversial, but it's the case, right? It's moving at such a pace. And then the second bit I want to say to myself is, you know, that it's a saying, but it's so important, is, you know, comparison is a thief of joy. Like, don't look at other people, don't see where they are in their career, don't see what they've got, because they probably don't have it anyway. You know, and actually, you know, try and figure out what actually matters to you, and be content with the things that actually matter rather than the things that you try and get through comparison. Because you can wind yourself. I mean, you know, it baffles me that LinkedIn is still a thing, you know, but a lot of it seems to be comparative. You know, it seems to be a lot around, oh, where are they at and what's their title and all that sort of stuff, rather than thinking about, you know, what really matters at home.
And you said you wish you could tell your younger self that. Were there periods of your career where you fell victim to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think, you know, coming out from uni was one, you know, where I kind of felt like, yeah, I had to take an entry level job and wasn't really sure where that was going. And then sometimes you feel frustration where you see people, you know, rocketing into other roles, or comparison thief of joy, right? Genuinely, you won't find the really positive reinforcing stories of, I can't wait for that to be me one day. It tends to be, why am I not there now? Or, you know, it's an interesting, because you tend to criticize yourself based on what it is you see rather than the other way through. Yeah.
Great.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. That's been fantastic.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks, guys.
Great.